I'm going to talk about the 8th Royal Scots, a Territorial Force battalion from a local area. Their origins go back to the late 19th century in the volunteer movement. At that time, the 6th Royal Scots Volunteers covered Midlothian and Peeblesshire, and the 7th Royal Scots Volunteers covered East Lothian or Haddingtonshire, as it was called at that time. The volunteer movement was a bit ad hoc in some respects. Training and uniform wasn't really standardised, and it caused problems trying to get them working together at larger unit levels. Following the Boer War, a review was conducted, and in 1908 it was decided that a number of units would be either disbanded or amalgamated. On the 1st of April 1908, the 6th Royal Scots Volunteers and the 7th Royal Scots Volunteers were combined to form the 8th Royal Scots Territorial Force. The 6th Royal Scots Volunteers, whose headquarters had been at Pennycook, this was disbanded, and the headquarters was moved to Haddington. This was a pretty unpopular move, and a lot of men left the movement at that time. And it is fair to say there was quite a bit of animosity and hostility towards the amalgamation. However, slowly but surely the unit did bond. This was probably due in part to the fact that there was a large number of miners in the battalion from both East and Midlothian, and they lived a common lifestyle, and it was probably easier for them to identify with each other. The 8th Royal Scots had a very good reputation for marksmanship, and they had 2 or 3 Bisley championships in the in their midst. You'll see from these 2 photographs here that the uniforms worn by the 8th Royal Scots bear quite a striking resemblance to uniforms worn by Anzacs in World War I. The slouch hat was very popular with Territorial soldiers long before the war, and long before even the Strides used them. And these photographs here, it's a pretty typical uniform with the bandolier and the slouch hats and the long Lee Enfield rifles. The first picture of the smaller unit is taken at Polton Bank in Bullig, and the second picture is from the annual camp at Stubbs near Hoyk in July of 1914, just before the outbreak of the Great War. You may notice from this photograph here that a number of these lads look very young indeed, and that is the case. The Territorial Force recruited lads as young as 14 to use as buglers and drummers, and the lad in the middle there, James Marshbank, was younger still. He was 13 when he joined. The local officer turned a blind eye and let him in because he could already play the bugle. This photograph again was taken in July 1914, just before the outbreak of the Great War. The majority of the lads that you see in this picture actually went with the battalion to France in November 1914. And a number of them didn't survive the war, unfortunately. This picture was taken on the day that war broke out in August 1914. It was taken in Pennycook by a lady from Bournemouth who was on holiday with relatives, and it shows F Company at Pennycook marching down to Lone Head and then on to Dalkeith to form up. They fought to go to France to go to war. In reality, actually having marched to Dalkeith, a distance about probably 7 miles or so, they were then told that to march into Edinburgh, and they spent the night at the Waverley Fruit Market next to the train station. In the morning, again, they thought they'd be heading off to war, but they actually were sent back to Haddington, where they remained until November 1914. On the 4th of November, 1914, they left Harrington and headed down to the port of Southampton, where they embarked across to France, and they became one of the first Scottish territorial units to land in France and be part of the British Expeditionary Force. They underwent a couple of weeks training. The staff were very impressed with the standard of the men, and on November the 11th, 1914, they were sent into the trenches. You may remember I mentioned James Marshbank. Now, this lad was born in June 1900, so in November 1914 he was still only just barely turned 14, and this is his will and testament, which appeared in his EB64 paybook. This photograph on the right here is James in France near Armentières early in 1915. You can see that he looks absolutely tiny. The first casualties weren't long in happening. First casualty was Sergeant David Grieve. He was a footballer with Newton Star and Trinent and juniors. He was shot by a sniper in the first night in the trenches, and that was followed a few days later by Sergeant Peacock, Sergeant Dick Peacock. He was also killed by a sniper. He actually came from the street that I live in Newton Grange. On the 20th of December 1914, the 8th Royal Scots participated in an attack in the German trenches, which resulted in a number of casualties. At the time, one of the men, William Cordery, he was posted missing. He had been recovering a number of wounded men from no man's land. He was seen to go out 3 times recovering men on his back, but the 4th time he headed out, he was disappeared, and he was posted missing, believed killed in action. As it transpires, he was wounded, and he lost his lower leg, which was amputated in a German hospital. And it wasn't until much later in the war that it was discovered he was alive, at which point he was recommended for and received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Sadly for him, though, his wife, thinking he was dead, had taken up with a Royal Engineer, and when he came back from the war, he got divorced. And a very, very sad tale, because he ended up in the jail after the war and had to forfeit his Distinguished Conduct Medal as well. On Christmas Day 1914, the 8th Royal Scots were in the front line and took part, very briefly, in the famous Christmas Day truce. This photograph here shows a Captain James Tate, later become Major James Tate, who in the front line trenches with his men, and he's on the ground. There's a box containing the Princess Mary boxes. As I say, the 8th Royal Scots did participate in the truce, but only very, very briefly. They went into no man's land, a handful of them, shook hands with Germans and exchanged cigarettes for cigars and swapped buttons, etc. By lunchtime, normal fighting had resumed, and the lad with his back to the trench, just looking at the camera, is a David Flockart from Gore Bridge, and sadly he was shot by a sniper on Christmas Day, so it's proof indeed that the truce didn't last very long indeed.